we can do.
Again, I make the
think
motion.
it's appropriate to bring back a proposal so that we can, discuss it more and decide
Okay.
if we'd like to have that added.
Certainly.
Because we need to think about budget.
Yeah, that's what he wants it for, to blend it into the rate and the fee structure,
Makes sense.
Anything else for our engineer before he gets to go home?
Yeah, I have one question.
Go ahead.
We haven't heard anything about the storage facility in a while. Any updates on that?
I have to check with Tyler, I'm not sure, I don't think we've gotten a development order or the water management, but I believe the issue with the development order was landscaping, and Mike, you may know where we stand better than I would.
You had things that you had to get back to the county with.
Yeah, that's, I don't know, it was in our update, I think, in the last meeting, but,
Yeah, but we didn't, I don't think we addressed it.
No, we didn't.
Could you just, in the next board meeting, just have an update so we know where we're at and where the action lives?
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, if I may, not an engineer, but
Okay.
David Lapidus would like to call in just to briefly talk about closing the loan with DEP, paying off Center State and doing all that, just for
Okay.
informational purposes, I believe.
Yeah.
So if while you all are talking about consent agenda, if I could have your approval to email him to call in.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, the next thing is consent agenda items for A, B, C. Anybody have an item they want to pull? Okay, is that the only one? On the minutes? And,
Okay. Only on page 14, it says Miss Flaherty instead of Mrs. Flaherty.
okay. So with that exception, to make that correction, do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda items for A through C?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Alright. That brings us to 5A, District Engineer Search.
Excuse me, who seconded that motion?
Bill.
No.
Ed seconded it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll address this item. Last month, we went out for request for qualifications for the district engineer. The existing contract actually ends today for our existing district engineer. And we received 5 proposals. And what we did for transparency purposes and try to get some community involvement is we asked some members of the community to assist us with reviewing and ranking the proposals. And very happy with the group that responded, very qualified, very involved. We had a couple Pelican residents, 2 from Gateway Greens, and we had 2 staff members. And with the proposals that were handed out, they were basically given a score sheet for points. And at the meeting, when we talked about reviewing these, I explained, because we had questions, well, can we have these firms come in, can we talk to them? And I said, well, chapter 287 for the statute, you're really just looking at the qualifications. And one fellow said, well, so we're looking at a marketing brochure. I said, well, basically, but it's the qualifications from the firm, and it's somewhat subjective. And and I said, but if you have any specific questions you'd like, you can give those to me, and I'll be happy to put them on a list. So we had the presentations from the engineers to the board that those questions could be addressed at that time. And it was interesting with the 5, we had one low ball, and Hagan Engineering scored low just because they're a one-man firm and somewhat of a lack of experience. Do you want to take that, Jesse?
Hello?
You're done?
Hello?
Hello, David? Go right ahead.
Gateway?
It is Gateway. You are now called into the CDD meeting.
David, this is Tony, and I introduced the topic by saying that you were just going to advise the board of the status for the closing of the, I'll call it the SRF loan, so we can pay off Center State and move on. And so if you could take a few minutes to explain where we are.
Yeah. where we are is that I think we finally reached an agreement. We had, I mean, nitpicks is the only way to describe it from various parties, and I'm not gonna assign, you know, any, you know, who it was, but we had various parties that had small matters of concern, and we addressed them all. We've got a payoff letter from, Center State Bank, and if we paid them off today, which is what we're really working, trying to do, the district was gonna need to come out of pocket about $93,000, because of the differences between what the district as a CDD is allowed to spend money on under Chapter 190, and what Florida DEP is willing to pay for under the revolving loan program. And so there's a gap there of about $93,000. I guess now, I mean, given the 4 o'clock on Thursday, we're not gonna be able to move money today, and you guys are board meeting. I would suggest, you know, pick a day next week and try to, and close then. I mean, and if anybody's got any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
What is our option to try and get it closed today?
Well, we've got money sitting, the district deposited the proceeds of the state loan, I think we're what, Iberia Bank?
Yes.
So we've gotta get money out of Iberia Bank to Regions Bank, and the Regions has gotta turn around and get it to, Center State Bank. And then we've gotta get that increment. I mean, everybody's anticipating that the whole loan is gonna be paid off, not a partial paid out. So wherever the other money, district money is coming from, has also gotta go to Regions. And so we've gotta coordinate that.
Yeah, and I guess, David, this is Tony. I'm not sure I understand why we'd have to push it back a week. Stephen Bloom is here, and I believe we already had money set aside previously for this project.
That is correct.
That the $93,000 could be paid out of prior assessments. Is that correct, Stephen?
That is correct.
So we can fund it with the combination of the money from DEP and the 93, and hopefully and sign everything today and fund it tomorrow. It sounds like that's possible. And Center State has been kind enough to waive any late fees. Is my understanding, is that correct, David?
Yes, they have waived all fees.
All late fees, they have accrued interest on the extension, but they've been kind enough to waive late fees. So I guess with Stephen's assistance and Chris and the chairman signing everything, whatever Stephen needs to sign as secretary, if we could have everything dated as of today and close it tomorrow and send wires around the world, it sounds feasible, correct, Stephen?
That is correct. We would have to, I mean, Chris or I would have to go to Iberia to do the wire.
Okay, that's doable.
Either one of us could do it tomorrow.
Okay.
Work is signed here. I don't see any reason why not to close it.
David, can you hear the conversations, David?
What?
Can you hear the conversations?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear.
Go ahead.
David, this is Ed Tinkle. I've asked for, haven't seen, and I don't know that it's your job to do, but I'm gonna rely on you. Typically, when we get done with a project like this and then we're in this position, the members of the board or the entity involved see what we call as a final engineering report that identifies the costs for which resulted in that project. I've asked for it, I've not seen it, but I'm a little surprised by the 93,000 because the last I heard in talking to Pankaj, and this was several months ago, was I was expecting a lot larger number, simply because the engineering fees that we use for inspection were non-eligible for SRF reimbursement, and I thought those numbers were up around 85 to 88,000. Does that mean that essentially all the other professionals' fees were loan eligible, which would have been bond counsel, assessment methodology, all that stuff was eligible?
I've not been provided a list of what's eligible and ineligible under the state program.
how did you come up with that 93,000 figure?
Well, what I did is very simply, is we had 3,000,008 change that the state is loaned to the district back in, what was it, April 26th when they moved their money.
Correct.
Yes.
And we've owed, Interstate Bank about 3.9 in principal, plus accrued interest that varies as, they bill interest and the district pays down interest. And then we've got various fees, trustees council, I think is 7,000. The trustee itself had a $5,000 acceptance fee and first year's fee. I had agreed to cap my fee at 45,000. It's probably over 50 at this point, but I was agreeing to, if we close this week, to cap at 45 plus expenses.
But was your fee reimbursed by SRF?
As far as I know, it's not.
I'm having troubles then with the math. If you're at 45 and you listed off two, then maybe another 5 or 10,000, and then I throw in the engineering, which was 85 as I recall, 93,000 doesn't get it. We're up to about 120 or 130,000.
At the bills that I've seen, I've not seen any bills from the engineers. I've not seen any new bills from, from Russ, doing the analysis for the special assessment.
Well, I guess that's what I'm trying to come up with.
And a big number that I don't think anybody, you haven't looked, you did mention, is the interest on the loan. I mean, because the district was paying interest on, and it's continuing to pay interest on the loan to Center State Bank for over a year now.
Let me ask Stephen a different way, maybe, because you're not into it. Stephen, who has a breakdown of all the costs to put them into two columns, SRF eligible and otherwise? In other words, local. My math tells me we're gonna be up around $150,000, $160,000.
Well, what you have to keep in mind is what David's talking about is closing out the Center State loan only, not total project cost. Two different things. So
Okay, but-
what we're tracking, and it's in your financials, is the total project cost. What he's dealing with is just trying to get the loan with Center State closed.
Understand that,
And
but-
he's comparing that against what came back from FDEP.
I understand that, but I think we're getting a false impression here. $93,000 is not gonna cover our share of that project, not covered by SRF.
And I'll comment on that too, and basically that 3.9 is all the eligible costs for the project, plus the engineering inspection, which you said was about 87.5.
Yeah.
And that covers it, but any legal fees, bond validation fees, and we've been paying the interest all along, so those fees are separate.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to find out is, I've done this for a long time. I've had legal fees and basically professional fees, all SRF eligible. Have we submitted the legal bills, the bond counsel bills, to SRF for a challenge of eligibility?
They aren't eligible, they told us right up front.
They told us that right off the bat.
Yes, sir.
So then, I guess the question is, what are we, Stephen, what are you anticipating that is coming out of this fund that we knew this was gonna happen? What is the number? It's because it's certainly not 93,000.
Well, for
It's
now.
a lot more than that.
I mean, the first number is gonna be 93,000. Now, what I would need to answer that complete would be all these other costs.
You don't have them?
Not yet. I mean, I'm hearing them now. Obviously, we're capping one at 40,000. So that's one piece, and then the final for the trustee. But we are tracking from a spending purpose. Everything related to this is all separate and in a project form. Now that we get this thing closed out, I'll be able to close out the FDEP portion and be able to answer all the rest of the questions.
What do we have set aside as far as the upset number that we have as a match, for lack of a better term?
Well, keep in mind, we started assessing for these lake bank projects a year ago.
Yeah.
So we have, and we haven't had to pay anything but the interest so far. So we still have those assessments, that's all separate and segregated
I'm
just for.
just trying to find out, are we talking about $200,000, $300,000?
I'm not sure on all the math yet, I don't wanna quote anything.
And for the purposes for today, to close out the loan, that's the most important thing, that's what we, so that we're not.
Our share of the
continuing-
first installment's 93,000, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and David, you had prepared a certificate for the closing statement, and there was a number in there as to the breakdown of the amounts necessary to close, including paying your invoice, 45,000. So, and that total number to pay your expenses and other expenses was 150?
I'd have to go back and look at it, but, let's see.
If you can read that off, I think that's what helped the board today. I think that's,
Yeah.
I'm having trouble accessing my emails.
I don't have any problem going forward with this, I just want to make sure we
I'll pull
maintain it.
that up.
Right, and it's gonna be important to separate the validation cost, you know, related to validating the entire 20 million.
Because it's upfront.
Right, because it's upfront to everything else, so that's kind of will be the next step for us to do that.
Okay. What I'd like to know is that we can get this loan paid off tomorrow. We'll be able to transfer all the funds from all the sources and get this loan paid off,
Yes.
okay?
Yeah, and David, unless you disagree with me, the chairman has the authority to execute all documents necessary to effect this closing.
Yep.
I think I've already signed it.
The number that I had, on the requisition, I had 3.948, basically 3,950, for Center Bank, be paid off, of which 3.8 change is coming from the SRF loan. And then I had, 150,000 to cover what was on the table. Now, no, I did not have any number for you, so I just said that should be paid out instead of closing.
Okay, and again, that's something that Stephen will allocate and take care of and address from the monies already in the account from the assessments.
Well, as I recall, when we entered into this project, we had the bids, we had identified, I believe, about $4.3 million.
4.4.
$4.4 million cost of the project, and we threw in everything that was our best guesstimate of all the fees and everything. And if we're saying, David, that we're around 385, is that what you were saying? 385?
385 is what we've already received from the state.
Is there any more coming from the state then?
No.
So then 385 less 4 or something is gonna be our share then?
And we hadn't received invoices for those legal fees or the fees from Regions Bank yet.
What do we have that we have not received? Tony's?
No, mine was sent in a while back.
So,
And,
so what are we missing?
David's for 45, which we now have a short form. Regions at
The
12,000, the $5,000 trustee fee, and your $7,000 attorney's.
What about Russ's?
And I'm not sure about Russ's. David, is Russ's on that list?
He's not on that list.
He's been paid
It's 20,
previously.
25 or something like that.
He's been paid though.
So that, but that was paid out of our nickel, not
The
SRF.
interest has been paid monthly, and interest on that bridge loan was not eligible for SRF reimbursement either.
You mean the interest during construction?
Yes, sir.
Can't you just order the manager and the finance manager to give us a written report on this?
Yeah.
It's
That
just
sounds
finalized.
perfect.
That's exactly what I was gonna do. So we'll get this loan closed out tomorrow, and then you'll be coming back with, all the numbers.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Do you need a motion of any kind?
I don't believe so, David. I'm not aware of any motion needed.
No, I think we're fine. I mean, we brought it to the board's discussed it. I think they granted approval of the transaction a while ago, so we can close it out at this.
This is informational.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, David. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
David.
it.
Okay, and when you finish your meeting, if you want to call me back, or have me call back, we can make sure that the document, you know, what you're doing with the documents, make sure that everything's ready to go in the morning.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
but otherwise I'm hanging up.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Bye. Bye, David.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep.
And he didn't object, Stephen, when you took it from 45 to 40. I thought you'd say something, I'm not cutting it any lower.
You want me to pick back up on our
Yes,
engineering work?
yes, thank you.
Well, basically, we received 5 proposals, and Tetra Tech, Nita, we had Weston and Sampson from Fort Myers, Kissinger Campo and Associates, Fort Myers, Hagan Engineering from Naples, and Craig A. Smith and Associates, Boca Raton. So we received solid proposals across the board, and it was interesting that the committee, though they were very different type people, besides Hagan, who scored rather low simply because he's a one-man firm and lack of experience, all the other scoring was within 10 points with the other 4 firms, from 76 to 86 points. And my recommendation would be to interview the 4 firms and come in and let them make a presentation to the board. It's typically about a 20-minute presentation and 10 or 15 minutes to ask questions, and let the board talk with these folks and make a selection, and rank them. And again, the only reason that Hagan was in there, and I'm not recommending for a presentation simply because he's a one-person firm, good experience, we've used him for other work, but, and I think even he would say that, I don't know if he's cut out for the district engineer level type work.
Hey, Chris, do you feel like the, Craig Smith and Associates came in close enough to be considered?
Well, they're very strong, and I think some of the folks on the committee felt because they were out of area, and they even asked me, can we give favoritism to local? And I said, you really can't do that unless the board passes a resolution to give preference to a local firm for that type of thing. But they do work throughout the area, and they've done a considerable amount of work for the city of Cape Coral.
Yeah, I was just curious if we could maybe shorten the list, but, okay.
Well, after the board members, I'm sorry, if I may, Madam Chair, I just request after the board members.
How's this, I've been in this room a lot, and I looked at the proposals. Everybody else look at those proposals? I learned in 40 years of doing this stuff, it's full of fluff. It's full of fluff. They tell you what they want you to hear. They don't tell you what they don't want you to do. And that is, I want to contact clients that are not on the list, that I know they're working for, and find out what's going on. I want to find out who's got conflicts of interest. We need no conflicts of interest of people that have ties with developers and other people that we do work with. That's turned out over the years to be a disaster. So I guess the question is, I don't know how you do that unless we can call all these individually during the next 2-week period to interview them as such, because otherwise you're going to catch them cold turkey coming here and they're not going to be able to answer the question. One of them is the conflict of interest. I want them to know right off the bat. I want to know anybody that you're working for, that you've worked with, that's conflict with Gateway CDD. How are we going to find that out if we do that unless we can call them ahead of time? If we can call them ahead of time, I don't have a problem.
Aren't they gonna push back and say, how do we know what contracts and engagements that you
Yeah,
have?
Just to mean the developers you work for.
I think it's more appropriate to have that in a public setting, to have those discussions. I think that's what the CCNA is designed to do, to have, as opposed to one-on-one conversations from the collegial body.
Well, your problem is with that is how you're gonna cold cock them, because they're not gonna be ready for those questions.
Well, they ought to be.
They know
They
which
ought to be.
developers they do work for.
But again, members of the committee had several questions, and I said that was more appropriate at the board level in the presentation. I could include those questions with it. And the conflict of interest, you mean conflict with
Developers, people that we work with. Can't work for 2 people.
And
Can't have 2 bosses.
And again, I think that's reasonable, being on the other side of it, sometimes making presentations. I always expect the unexpected when I make presentations. And so I think it'd be better. I think what's also important is the board have the notes, or the minutes from the meeting of the selection committee. It'd be before they had those conversations also with the presenter. But Ed,
Well, and I'm getting into that, because there's some questions that have come back to me that I have learned that disturb me, and immensely disturb me. One of them is that these guys were told, these people in this committee, that the reason we're doing this is totally to get rid of our current engineer. That's bull. That just is not right.
Well, actually, when.
That is not the purpose of this selection process.
Well, actually, during the selection process, John Dalen made a comment to me, asked a question. He said, usually when I see an incumbent and you're going out for requests for quotes, it indicates entitlement or issues with staff or that. And he asked me that question, and I told him, well, no, sir, not at all. I go, the existing contract's coming up, and with Mainscape, we went out, even though they've been a long-time vendor. We're planning on going out for our aquatic weed spraying contract.
I understand all that.
Excuse me, excuse me, that was at the second meeting. The statement you were talking to, we're gonna give it a Tetra Tech was the first meeting. Chris, respectfully, you weren't there.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah, the issue is that we're going out because the contract is up, and we're doing that, but we're not going out to get rid of the engineer we have. And that's what was stated in the meeting, and that's not true.
No, and actually.
And the other part of it is that we indicated that these guys are going to be reporting to the staff, and our vendors by statute report to the board, and there's nothing we can do about that. So there's some confusion with what these, the guys that were on the committee heard versus what we're really going to do.
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
when he's finished, I'd like to
okay.
amplify some of the.
Go,
Yes.
go ahead, Bill, I'm done.
First of all, the engineering firms, if they are large enough and well enough staffed to be of any interest to us, should be prepared to answer any legitimate question that this board can come up with. However, if you want to be completely fair or not have anybody say you were unfair, a better way to put it, all you have to do is send a letter to the firms that you want to interview, giving them the approximate time and the date, and tell them to be prepared to answer these questions.
I go with that.
Mhm.
I go with
I agree with that.
yeah, I'm not comfortable with the process with our individual interviews of vendors by individual board members.
Say again?
You know, he's
I
not
know.
talking about that.
Oh, he's talking about.
He's
Single
having,
meeting.
he's
Single
consolidating
blanket statement.
questions
Okay.
for the manager to send to them in
For the
advance
board
so
meeting.
that they come for the board
Thank you.
meeting
I
prepared.
misunderstood.
And then,
Thank you.
and the same questions would go to all of the
Thank you.
prospective
And
interviews.
it would say, be prepared to answer,
I'm-
and show examples of conflict of interest or.
Good idea.
And following up on what he said, is I have a problem with doing it, is we're walking a thin line individually talking to those people ahead of the
Yes,
meeting.
my concern.
We're walking a thin line. So I agree with you, Bill. Just let us put together the questions that we want to have asked, or the topics to be prepared to talk about. I'd go along with that.
And I'd say if we submit them to Chris, and then Chris, you go through them and pull out the ones that you feel are pertinent.
And we have lists from some of the members too, because they even had approached and said, can we contact these firms? And I said, no, that's not the CCNA, that's not, you're just looking at the qualifications they submitted and looking at the score sheet ranking.
And were the questions from the committee, were they specific to specific vendors? Or were they blanket statements?
Blanket.
Okay. So I think that's the way we should position them, is the question should be,
Blanket to all of
Yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah. Same question to everybody. To be prepared, I'd go along with that, just
And do we-
formulate our questions and submit them to Chris to have them for the deal.
and are we gonna give everyone 15 minutes timed, and
You can't do it in 15 minutes.
well then, well that's. but
It
I-
depends how much time you want to spend in, because if you're gonna do the 4 firms, you know, even minimum 30 minutes per, you're looking at a 2-hour block of time. It's gonna
See,
be.
I was gonna go the other way, I was just gonna go 2 firms, just take the top 2 as ranked by these guys, and be done with it.
The CCNA says you shall select an order of preference no fewer than 3 firms.
Okay,
For
great.
the alternate, so if you're going to go that route, and after, I think Mrs. Fleury still has a question, and I don't want to step on her toes before I make a comment.
She was gonna make a motion, I think.
Yeah, my concern is I've been apprised and I've advised the chairman, for the board, something that I believe I have a recommendation to make to the board. I've been advised that one of the staff members, who's also on the selection committee, made comments that I would characterize, in my opinion, are biased against one of the proposed vendors, and that individual should be disqualified from any further participation on the selection committee, as well as his ranking should be disqualified, not considered, and that's Mike Tisch. I have an email from Danny Nelson. Danny Tyler's a bond counsel in our firm. If I can pass, I just learned of that this morning, and I have copies for the record also. And the email I received from Mr. Nelson was, Tony, I had a discussion with our field inspector, Rick Spieth, today. He indicated that he was approached in the field by Mike Tisch, who on multiple occasions indicated how he despises us and can't wait to get rid of us, and how Gateway is going through the selection process to get rid of us. He then asked Rick if he would be interested in coming to work directly for Gateway, as they are considering eliminating the engineering contract altogether. Then these actions are unethical, especially as our contract is up for reselection. Given that, I feel it should be addressed, but I don't believe it would be appropriate for me. Any advice? And then I notified Mr. Nelson, I advised the chairman, and had a conversation with the chairman. And my email to the chairman from 10:45 this morning is, Margaret, please see below. Based upon that information, I am of the opinion and will advise the board that Mike Tisch either needs to immediately recuse himself from any participation in the district engineer solicitation, ranking, and evaluation process, or failing that, the board needs to immediately remove him from that process. In addition, based upon that information, I am of the opinion and will advise the board that any evaluations and rankings by Mr. Mike Tisch of the proposers must be totally discounted and not considered or utilized in the current district engineer solicitation, ranking, and evaluation process.
And I did speak with Tony on the phone about this, so I was aware that this email had come out.
Yeah, I don't take these things lightly. I've never had this happen in my experience in all my districts, all these years of having this occur. That's where I give this guidance.
I'm concerned about this statement that there's the opinion that we're doing away with the engineer. Why are we doing it? We're not doing away with the engineer. I don't get that at all, and we certainly haven't talked about hiring an engineer for a staff person, because we don't have the facilities, we don't have AutoCAD, we don't have any of the things that an engineer would be beneficial to us for. As much as I love the job, you can't do it. You can't do it. You've got to have a firm that has the ability to do this, especially with all the things that we get involved in. But I just don't understand this philosophy that of where we're going on this.
And I could see down the road, you know, like, after we've got the district running smoothly, to consider creating that position, but not now. That would be like 5 years down the road, maybe we'd add that type of a position. But, does anybody have any questions or comments regarding this?
The only comment I have is you could take Mike's score out of there, and the incumbent's still ranked #1. And I don't think it changes the 2, 3, or 4.
And just for the board's information, my advice and opinion was provided before I even saw these rankings. I had not received them until I walked into the board meeting today. It's based upon my concern for the integrity of the process.
So, here's my point of view is, whether our future plans include X or Y, it's almost irrelevant. I think in the grand scheme of things, I think that the conversation is unethical and it shouldn't have taken place. And I think when you look at that action and previous actions, Chris, and you need to have a conversation and escalate this to a proper either disciplinary action or go through the steps, because we can't have this type of behavior, and this is very serious.
I understand. It's the first I've heard of any of it today.
Madam Chairman, may I?
Yes, go right ahead.
I think Doug is absolutely right. If I were running the show, I would advise you to appoint one board member and our attorney and the manager to meet with Mike and get to the bottom of this and make a decision, recommendation on how to proceed.
And, or Tony, do you want to be part of that?
If that's the
You
board's
in
will,
agreement?
it's the board's pleasure.
And, I, without objection, I'll be the board member unless somebody else would prefer to do it, but I'll be happy to do that. I was very concerned when I got Tony's email, and I also had, I got other information from a committee member that was unhappy about the first meeting when they were told the purpose was to replace Tetra Tech. And we needed to get rid of Tetra Tech. And that's concerning going into the meeting, telling the committee members that. That was, I found that unfortunate. So with that, Chris, if you'll set up a meeting for the four of us, we'll do this. Now, Mrs. Flaherty, you wanted to make a motion. We'll get back to the motion.
All right, I would like to make a motion to have the top four engineering firms present to the CDB board. You want me to set a date?
Let's get a second here on this, and we'll set a date.
I'll second.
Okay?
Would you consider 3? I don't want to take and spend money on a firm from the East Coast on travel time, and as much as we're here, we saw that when it killed us on this stormwater project in fees for travel time and hours. We can't afford that.
All right.
One thing that my concern with that comment is that the CCNA does not provide, as far as the ranking and determination for evaluation, the compensation or cost. So that's an
On the grounds that they're number 4 on the list, I would take the top 3.
The requirement is 3, and if
Yeah.
the minimum of 3, would we accept just the top 3?
Yeah, the
If
top
you
3.
amend your motion, I'll amend my second.
Sure, I'll amend my motion for the top 3.
And I guess for clarification on that, Chris, you mentioned that the rankings remain the same?
They do remain the same.
Even
I
after
just-
removing the traditional
I
scores?
just did it.
Okay, thank you.
It goes from 1 going to, actually to 90, 2, which is Kissinger, to 81, which stays the same. Weston goes to 79, and just for the continuation, Hagan goes to 44, and Craig Smith goes to 70.
You think?
Okay, yeah.
Would you run this by again?
Yes, sir,
please?
I will. Craig A. Smith Associates goes to 70 average. Hagan Engineering goes to 44. Kissinger goes to 81.
Stays at 81?
Yes, sir. And Weston and Sampson goes to 79. And Tetra Tech goes to 90.
Thank you.
And give you the median too if you want me.
Wow, boy, you're quick.
He was working on that for 20 minutes.
If the motion was to go back to the top 3,
Yes,
that was.
that is the amended motion, and
Second.
amended second.
Which would be Tetra Tech, Kissinger, Campo, and Weston and Sampson.
That's correct.
And I will call that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll interview the top 3. Now we'll talk about when we'll bring them back.
Madam Chair, just for informational purposes, Chris, has the district and Tetra Tech signed the extension of their agreement?
Tetra Tech has, I was actually gonna bring it to the next board meeting since it was,
Because technically the agreements would otherwise expire beforehand, and I'm
Expires
trying to
today.
resurrect that agreement.
What's the extension for 30 days or?
60 days. 16 till
60
go
I think
through the
July-
CCAN and the new contract.
It'd actually be 62 days to July 14th, because 60th day would be a Saturday otherwise.
I mean, is that something, can we vote on that now and
I think that'd be
execute?
appropriate.
Yeah, so I'll make a motion to agree the extension.
And before any action is
Okay.
taken, if they're open up to the members of the public as it's an action. It'll be 62 days.
62 days, should we just make it 90?
It's up to the board.
Okay, 62 days.
No, 90 is fine.
I mean, if they
Let's just
sign
do-
a new agreement,
I understand, I agree.
We've got so much on the schedule that needs to be done. I wouldn't want to extend it any longer. We have to get this done and get going.
okay.
Well, but if, the extension just covers the time in between, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll have. Yeah, I just don't want this to go in limbo. I want to make
No,
a decision and go as
I
quick as
just
possible.
don't want us at day 63 to say, uh-oh, we don't have a new signed agreement, now what are we gonna do? That's why I was saying 90, just to cover.
Just as long as we
this.
understand that we're working to try to make it as minimal as possible.
So, I'm comfortable.
So I make the motion to extend Tetra Tech's contract for 90 days, effective,
Which is 90 days.
90 days.
I know Chris and I looked at, the way I read the agreement expires May 15th, Chris said May 17th, and so 90 days would take it to August 13th.
August 13th.
so extend the Tetra Tech contract to August 13th.
And do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second
Okay. And,
Question on this.
okay, go ahead.
Not, could you just repeat your motion? I'm writing this down.
Yeah, the motion is to extend the Tetra Tech contract to August 13th.
Which is 90 days, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
One of the things that we've had, that we've seen in this contract, you want to take the vote on that, please?
Yeah.
Well, I need to open it up to the audience. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make on the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, go right ahead, Mr. King.
Thank you.
We have an agreement right now that, I don't know who authored it, sorry, Tony, if it was you.
I was part of it, yes.
You
can
can
back- you can backhand me, yes.
I'll just stick the knife in the front, not the back.
That's fine, I appreciate it.
That contract is not very good. The issue is, I expect to pay a professional to attend our meetings. I expect to pay him. That's not free. And why we're telling and told them, I want to make sure that these guys that are coming in for the interview understand that we pay our consultants. If they do an hour's work for us, I expect to pay them hours. Don't come here and try to hide or recover the cost in either overhead. I've been there down this road, learned it well. Don't do that. Bill for the time. So in the future, the contract should have provisions that when they're here, they're paid.
Absolutely, and they should be prepared to answer all the questions relevant to the items.
Which means I think we need to, the big thing about that, Bill, is we've had, as you know, things pop up in the meeting that you don't know of that extend the stay of the engineer for the meeting. It would be real nice to come in, wham, bam, thank you, man, and be gone. But we have stuff that comes up later on that, hey, I wish the engineer was here, we need an answer for that.
Well, and not only
But
that.
to the best we can, if we can let them know ahead of time that, hey, we're gonna be talking about this, and Stephen or whoever it is that has that deal needs to be here.
Well, and not only that, I think not to delay the vote, but I think there should be standing meetings with the engineer and the district on a weekly basis as part of that contract, stay in line, lock and step with what we're doing and staff and each work together. But I'm sure we'll have opportunities to talk more about the contract details as we move
Right,
forward.
exactly. So I will call the vote to extend the Tetra Tech contract 90 days or to August 13th. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I do.
Okay, that passes. Now, let's talk about when to bring the engineers, the three companies in. What is on the agenda? Oh, are you gonna be gone?
I'm going.
I was just gonna say, could we start our meeting at 2:00? Next meeting? I'm just asking, I don't know if Mr. Banks can make it. That way we wouldn't have another date. It was a
Jim, we'll
suggestion.
talk about that in just a minute. When are you gonna be gone?
May 30th to June 9th.
Okay, so that would exclude the 7th of June. Everybody will be available on June 21st. It's either
Yes.
that or we have a special meeting just to interview the engineers.
I don't want to have a meeting without Bill.
Exactly, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't wanna have to be with them, all be present.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Go
So-
ahead.
so-
Feel-
No, no, no.
You're not getting out of that easy, mister. So the 21st works for me.
Okay.
And I
Now-
think if we could just have a light agenda to cover the,
Yeah.
Well, and normally, the second meeting of the month is our workshop, so we'll make selection of the engineer a workshop.
Start at the same time, 3 o'clock?
Unless two,
I don't work.
yeah, exactly. I don't have a problem with
It's
2
Doug. I
o'clock,
don't have
so
a
it's
problem
up
with
to
2, but I
Doug.
don't know if
He
it's-
the difference is starting an hour early or essentially ending an hour later.
Right.
I don't care.
If we could start it at 3, that would be
Okay.
better for me.
Okay, we work, so,
Excuse me, Madam Chairman.
Yes.
When it's appropriate, I'd like to ask a couple questions.
go right ahead.
Number one, are we going to set an exact number of minutes maximum that these folks get to talk to us or listen to us? Have we decided 30 minutes is maximum?
I wouldn't go less than 20,
Wouldn't go less
but
than
wouldn't go
20?
less than 20 for sure.
That's 30's a good number.
30 is a good number. Secondly,
That's 2 hours.
An hour and a half.
Now we're gonna have a transition, so
yeah,
it'll be
right.
2 hours.
At what point are we going to be, let's say after the
Presentation.
interviews, there's one company that we want above all others. At what point are we going to work on contracted fees? Is fees gonna be a subject of the interview process?
No, it would be, what would happen is once the board selects the top-ranked firm, you would direct your manager, and typically the manager of the council and or the chair to negotiate with the top-ranked firm to try to come back with an agreement as to all those issues by the next board meeting. And if they're unsuccessful, then they have the authority to negotiate with the next ranked firm.
Should there be a proposed contract to go out to these folks when we invite them in for interviews, so they'll know what the contract is likely to
I
look
think
like,
that's-
and if there's any major complaints on their part, we can hear it from them before we start interviewing, or before we start negotiating.
I think that's
with them.
reasonable, Chris and I can work on that.
Come up with a form of agreement.
Yep.
And if at all
That's a
possible,
good point.
can you circulate the existing contract with the board? So if we have any amendments or.
I was gonna say,
any red
don't send it
lines-
out because we won't have anybody come in. That contract
No, no,
is
no, no, no,
horrible.
I think we all need to review it, because I think we all have certain things that we'd like to, add to it.
Thank you.
But then to follow up on you, then the next thing would be, I'm assuming that once we go through that, we would immediately go into a session for selection.
Yes.
How does
Then
this?
we would rank.
We got timing issues coming up, we got a budget. The engineer is instrumental in that budget. That's gonna take time, especially with this new deal where you have to define your year's costs into these accounts. That ain't gonna happen overnight.
That's why we have Stephen.
Stephen will do it, but he's gotta have somebody give him the numbers.
Stephen has his own numbers.
But, yeah, so the understanding is that we would immediately go into the selection right after the interviews.
Yes.
And Mr. Guy, what I would suggest is that between now and before the Chris and I will try to work on it and have a draft, you'll be gone the 7th, and then trying to figure out how to incorporate your comments into the agreement. We'll try to work on it before you leave.
You just review it, and you put your red lines in the contract, shoot it back to Chris, and then you'll consolidate.
He really can't consolidate, because then, but we'll work it out, how to do that.
Okay, so we have the district engineer, we know we're gonna bring 3 of the companies back. Now that brings us to pre-enforcement notification by South Florida Water Management District, or better known as SWIFT. Yes, Mrs. Swift?
Do we have to make a motion for that, for the year on the 21st?
No.
No, okay, just making sure, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. SWIFT.
What page are we on?
153.
Do you want to start this?
No, I'll let you start. Well, the, let me just put it this way, the South Florida Water Management District is serious, very serious. With regard, South Florida Water
Excuse me,
Management.
one moment, please. Jim, can you hear me?
I do, but except when you turn your head. And Kathy, I don't hear you because the microphone's so high.
We should have done a sound check
Thank you.
prior to.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you all.
The meeting that was held on May 10th, it was very obvious that, to all that South Florida is very serious, and this is the 1 minute before midnight, 1 second before midnight. There was any opportunity to discuss with them meanings of various documents as to easements, no easements, operating, not operating, is gone. Now, what they did agree was that we would be able to, when we submit the permit transfer of operating entity forms, if we legitimately believe, and Danny, you can correct me, or Chris, or correct me if I'm wrong, if we legitimately believe that we should not be the operating entity for a portion of the system, by way of example, Santa Luz condominium. There is drainage internal, like in the parking lot where the condos are, and there might be some other drainage, like an outfall, that the this district should be responsible for, but internal, should be more appropriate, if I can just finish that, more appropriately be the condominium association. Then we would have to transfer the entire permit, but try to list out what we believe should be the operating responsibility of either a homeowners association, a property owners association, condominium association. And so that's how they said, you can't go in there now and say, well, gee, we'll do this later on, do a co-permittee. If we're gonna do a co-permittee at a later point in time, like for the roadways, get Lee County as a co-permittee for the roadway catch basin drainage, then we still need to, we, the Gateway, need to accept the operation responsibility, list out that we believe we're responsible for the pipes after they leave the roadway, and that Lee County would be responsible for the drainage in the roadway, and then later on come back and do a request for co-permittee without having any permit modification. Did I cover that properly, Danny? Danny has a thumb up. Chris, am I okay on that? And Mike was there also?
And basically, there is 16 permit applications yet to be transferred. The South Florida Water Management made it very clear they don't care what issues we have with any of them, that they want the transfers in their office, or they're going to start finding us. And if there's any issues with them, it's up to us to work them out, if it's a co-permittee, or if it's meeting a easement to get to the property. They don't care. That's our problem, not theirs. And they're serious. They're not going to give 1 minute past midnight. They want these transfers in their office.
Yeah, what was frustrating was a couple of the operating when we got the package from them with the attachment A, it had the 17 permits with all the various